mind just telling me what your inspiration and goals were for Quake?
Well, back at that time, there really was some truth to the often made statement that technology was driving the games that we were doing, and there was a clear technical path on what we had done moving from Wolfenstein to Doom into Quake. It was obviously we wanted to wind up in this 3D universe with freeform movement and 6 degree of freedom camera positioning and all of this, and the game did sort of wrap itself around that. There were a number of obvious things that would happen when you took a Doom-style game and you moved it into a full freeform 3D space, and there were also some limitations that we had because we were really kind of pushing things on the bleeding edge of what could be done on the computer systems at the time, so we weren't able to carry over kind of the massive, overwhelming carnage of Doom 2 into there. So the game had to change and evolve to kind of fit within what we wanted to do, but we thought it was still worthwhile to make that step into 3D as early as possible and start exploring the new characteristics that we would have as gameplay there. And after that, then you build experience, the computers get faster, and you can start doing something that is more targeted around the design of it rather than the pure technology. But the original Quake really was a technology showpiece.
Do you feel like today the technology is still driving the design of the games, or how is the relationship?
Not nearly as much as it used to be. There's certain things where the technology is clearly holding you back in the development of a game, but those things have gotten really fewer and farther between, where nowadays you're almost always held back by your content creation or deciding how you're going to implement your grand designs on there, and the technology is not at all the roadblock that it used to be. It used to be a very harsh taskmaster where you'd say you have 250 triangles for this, or you have 4 megabytes of memory for all of this, and most of those limitations, while you still run into them later in the project when you've made 4 gigs of data or something now, but it's not like it was before where you had to carefully craft a jewel of a design to fit within the limited restraints that you had. Nowadays it's much more, you really have the freedom to hang yourself with your own design, and the technology is rarely the excuse that you can give that why the game is no good.
How would you say Quake affected the industry from its release until today?
I think the most important thing that Quake probably pulled out was not so much the graphics technology, but what it did with multiplayer, the kind of persistent internet server, which became a very common model for things, and the extension of the user modifications that we were pioneering earlier on with Doom. And I think those are the two things that when people look back as those are the trends that you still see in the games today. 3D was pretty obvious. We knew we were working towards it there, and Quake might have brought it into the industry a year or two earlier than it might have happened without that. But some of the things like the freedom with the source code, that may not have happened without us pushing hard for it in the early days, and that's still a very common thing which is pervasive throughout the industry today.
Can you talk about how online communities today, what they owe Quake?
Nowadays the online communities are such almost all pervasive, serious affairs. I'm an outsider to the online communities today. In the early days, I was on there playing with everybody and having fun, but now it's a lifestyle choice, and I'm really kind of beyond that point in my life where an online community that takes up such a large amount of your time is really a viable thing for me. But the seeds were always there, and we always knew from the beginning that we wanted to be building the metaverse and a place where people could spend large portions of their life online in the games or environments of their choices there. So that was always the vision, and while the parts that we sort of pioneered with the semi-persistent online servers and the action games, when we started seeing things like Ultima Online and later EverQuest coming on, I was just thrilled to see that type of thing going, because that was really more the vision of where we kind of figured the online community type things would head.
Can you talk about the relationship between user-created content and like developer-published content?
The original impetus for it really was me just looking back at my time when I was 14 years old playing with old copies of Ultima 2 or something, and I'd be in there with my sector editor trying to drop treasure chests into the maps in different places, and I could still clearly remember thinking how wonderful it would be if I could go in and poke at the source code for things like that. If I could go in and see how this was done and maybe add new monsters or something to it. And it was only possible in the very crudest, completely unsupported sense back then. But when I reached the position that the games that I was developing became very much the same thing for the new generation of people, and I was in a position where I had the power to make that actually possible, to go ahead and let them see exactly how the games were put together, to not only kind of poke at it in a sort of random shotgun approach, but to be able to go in and actually skillfully craft something just as the primary developers were. So that was something that I wanted to do, putting myself in the shoes that I was when I was a game player, when I was a lot younger. That would have been the most wonderful thing for me, and I was really happy to be able to give that to the people that are in my shoes yesterday and today.
Can you talk about how that relates to patents?
The patent situation is a really troublesome thing for me, as my primary work is as an engineer or a technical creator on things, and the honest truth is that everything that's done today in any significant product infringes on patents. There is no way around it. It's a question of random enforcement and discovery. And when you look at a law, and if you say, if this was enforced absolutely, how horribly it would destroy almost everything that's done in technology today, that's why I can look at that and say it's a bad law, because if you had infinite omniscience to be able to enforce it around everything, it would destroy the technical world. You can find easily all of the minor, small-scale cases. I mean, I've got the obvious case with Doom 3, where there was some shadow technology that I went and I developed. I was really happy with how I came up with the ideas, and I even had this little document about my steps of insight that led to the final, how everything came together, and this became a really valuable, useful technique. But it turned out that the month before I had done that, somebody had independently gone through probably almost exactly the same creative process there, and they had figured it out. And it just seems pretty fundamentally wrong when you've got thousands of talented, capable people here that could maybe go reach the exact same solutions, that the first one that gets there, that chooses to go file a patent instead of continuing work on their project to actually make their project better, they may be able to shut out some of this other development there. And it's a really saddening thing where everybody looks at patents from the sympathetic case of the lone inventor working in their garage that wants to patent it so that the evil corporations can't come and steal his idea, see his idea, take it, and exploit it. But patents are almost always a case of simultaneous development now, where you take a given problem and you take 100 smart guys and 50 of them will come up with the same solution to it. And it's just wrong to have that patented and taken away from their ability to do in the future.
Talk about what your goals were for Quake 3 Arena.
Well, I've always been fond of making a pure play whenever possible, and it's against the grain in the modern development world where the theory is you throw in everything and the kitchen sink in every product that you do. And that may very well be what the market is now and what you're expected and required to do, but I have always liked picking a focus and trying to do a really, really good job at that, even if it does mean perhaps giving short shrift to some other aspects of it, because by definition, you can't focus on everything. It's just not possible. The act of focus is deciding what you're not going to pay as much attention to, and we don't have infinite schedules and infinite teams and so on, so you have to pick your battles on there. And I push hard to try and be really, really good at one aspect that we think is important, even if it does mean not necessarily being the best in some other aspects. And honestly, we have had to back a little bit away from that and move towards jack of all trades on some of the more modern, larger projects, because it does seem to be that the industry would rather see you hire another 100 developers to go ahead and have a great single-player game and a great multiplayer game. But unfortunately, it winds up that many times you wind up with a mediocre single-player game and a mediocre multiplayer game, but there's pretty strong incentives pushing development teams that way.
Can you talk about what was innovative for Doom 3?
Well, the big obvious thing for Doom 3 was it really did herald the next generation of graphics technology. It's the generation that you see all around us today, where we can look back, and I think there were three major generational steps that we went through, where we had the original Doom, which was line of constant Z, no kind of real look up and down, limited camera view stuff, and there were whole bunches of games from various developers that kind of zeroed in on that generation of technology. And the following generation, when it really solidified, the first step with Quake was very specialized and hard, because it was, again, barely possible. But a couple generations more, once you were into the Quake 2, Quake 3 time frame, the model was light-mapped environments and vertex-shaded characters. And you still see the trailing edge of that technical wave today, where games that are still built on technologies that are like that. But Doom 3 brought in the level of per pixel lighting and shadowing, where we have accurate bump maps and accurate shadows going through everything. And it did take things to another level of visual fidelity. And there were certainly some skeptics at the time basically saying, don't we have enough visual fidelity for the games that we want to do? And there's some truth to that, because the gameplay mechanisms don't change really dramatically when you bring on a new level of visual fidelity. There were some specific things that we were doing with lighting and shadowing that did affect gameplay and did affect the user, but there is some truth to the fact that piling more and more graphics technology on isn't necessarily going to automatically give you a huge benefit. But with Doom 3, it was a big, very nearly a pure play on the experience. We wanted to take people in, we wanted it to be dark and scary and frightening in a way that we could not do as effectively in a previous generation. And of course now that generation technology is fairly widely adopted, and these are sort of the technical cornerstones of render bumping high polygon models onto low polygon models and per pixel lighting that define sort of the generation of technology that we're in right now.
So do you feel that we are going to, taking graphics, are we going to go all the way to where it's photorealistic or site realistic?
Well, I actually think that in certain situations right now we already are, and it's going to be a slow... In graphics, one of the real design issues where you show wisdom in graphics design is choosing your battle to do the things that you can do well and avoid the things that you can do that you can't do really well. And we had a very conscious decision at id through a lot of things where we tried to avoid having humans in our games for the longest time, because to this day, doing humans really well is really hard. You've still got the kind of, if they're going to look like zombies, we might as well make them zombies. And if they're going to have, a pasty pallor to their skin and all of this stuff. So there are things, right now I think there are some games, like some sports games, that you can be looking at when you walk by someone's office and you're not sure if it's a television broadcast or a sports game. Now, when you get up closer and you look at the screen, you can see some of the telltale CG issues on there, but that's going to be the way things go as we chip away at it, where there will be more and more scenes where it's not clear from glancing in at something whether it's like a video source or whether it's rendered in a computer game. There will always be cases where you say, even in the most advanced offline rendering tool today, you can contrive scenes that will not render well, and that will certainly be the case for 2 decades more in games, where there will be some scene that some designer comes up with and says, I want to do this in the game, and it's not going to render photorealistically. But the set of things that we can't do like that is going to get smaller and smaller between now and then.
What interests you in mobile gaming?
Well, it started off as sort of a lark for me, where I was just looking at I got a new phone, I looked at it, and I thought, these games are awful. The Java demos that were on this phone, and to some degree I was morally indignant at it, where here was the processing power and the graphics in here were much better than the early games that we did at id Software with like our early Commander Keen games, and yet the games, that, at least on this particular phone, were just really bad. And it was a case of developers were going into it with the wrong plan, poor implementation, and all of this. So I just kind of, one evening, took a little shot looking around, seeing how difficult is it to develop for these, and it turned out for the Java phone that I had, it was really easy. I could download all the tools off of the net, and I made a little hello world on here, and I went through the thought process of, well, what would justify me taking some time and making a real product on this? And I have to go through that pretty consciously, because my time is incredibly valuable to me and to lots of other people, where there's a lot of demands on my time, and if I was to do this as anything other than a lark of John going off and playing with a new toy on here, I had to have it make some degree of sense on that. So there were 2 steps to it. One is, I think that I came up with a novel concept for the gameplay that caters to the primary difference between these devices and old game consoles, which is the input device, where cell phones just don't play like a Nintendo. Even though the processing power and graphics are better, you can't put an old Nintendo game on a cell phone and expect it to be good. So I came up with this particular kind of interpolated, turn-based design that I thought played very well on the phone. And then the second part that made it really turn into a project that we were going to do was, we had the Doom movie coming out last year, and we had no way to get any mainstream console or PC product out in the same time frame, because our multi-year development cycles were just out of sync with it. But I reasoned that, hey, we could probably throw together a little mobile title in 6 months. We could use some Doom stuff on it, so we cobbled together the Doom RPG situation, where we got to use some of our old assets and the sounds and images that people loved from the hazy memories of back in the day there, and we got to wrap it up in a new style of gameplay and experiment on here. And it turned out that it worked out well. It won several awards, and it's been successful. It's actually making, it's earned out the royalties, or the advances, and it's making royalties now. And we have followed that on with a new sequel, which we're also debuting here at E3 this year, that really shows the other core benefit of this, is that the cycle times being so small, being able to do Doom RPG in 6 months with a small team, that takes us back all the way to our Commander Keen days, where we got a couple projects done in a year. And there are things that you learn doing that you just do not learn over a 3 or 4 year development cycle. I mean, it's sad today in the industry where you see a lot of people that have never seen, they may even have been in the industry for 8 years, and they haven't seen a project through from beginning to end because they work 3 years at one company, then move to another company and do 2 more years, and they don't see the things from initial idea, implementation of the idea, and then evaluation of how the idea actually played out in the real world. Because you have to go through that cycle to learn what you want to change, because otherwise you're still just kind of randomly groping for a design in the dark. So I think we've got a great example of that with the current title, with Orcs and Elves, where we were able to go in, take what we thought was cool and neat and fun with Doom RPG, and add a whole bunch more stuff on top of it, and really polish and enhance a new sort of core concept that we had for this gameplay mechanism. And I think it's turned out great, so I'm really happy with that.
Do you have any favorite games from the last 10 years?
Well, I would say that if we go all the way back 10 years ago, the game that I usually point out as my favorite game would probably have been Sonic the Hedgehog, which I did look at as an early forebearer of a technology pure play early on, where the original game, it was simpler than its predecessors, comparing it to the various Mario Brothers or Mario games, but it took a technical thing, the speed of the Genesis on there, and being able to run around at this incredible high speed, zipping around, and it made a great game on that. And I do think that they lost the pure play aspect over the years as they exploited it as a franchise on there, where they had to add in everything in the kitchen sink like everything else. But I thought that was a gem that I look back to as a really good example of picking your goal, running for it, and ignoring a lot of the stuff around it. I mean, nowadays I don't get into any of the really big games that take over your life and take forever to play. I mean, I'll play little games like Ridge Racer and things like that on the PSP, or the last game I played, Baldur's Gate, on the Game Boy Advance, which was one of the things that also led into the Doom RPG and Orcs and Elves stuff, kind of bringing me back to thinking about the fantasy games that I had enjoyed so much when I was 15 years old, the early Wizardries and Ultimas and so on.
Great. Anything else about the future, where you see the future of the industry headed?
I can usually look ahead technically where things are going, but it's hard to really get a grasp over how much distance there is. When we look at things where, from the time we started making games to where we are right now, the difference in power, it's something like 10,000 times. I started writing games on an 8-bit Apple II, a 1 megahertz processor, that is maybe 100,000 times slower than what we've got today in terms of processing something like floating point power. And it's easy to look ahead one order of magnitude to say, if we have 10 times more stuff, I'll be able to do this algorithm and that algorithm. We'll give up on this old way of doing things, and we'll have this much more freedom to do that. But when you start looking at 2 or 3 orders of magnitude, it's hard. It's a hard game to try and predict things like that into the future. And I do think we've got another 3 orders of magnitude coming. While it's true that clock rates have slowed down a lot over the last few years, although certainly the console's still got a big boost this time. I mean, we may not see 20 gigahertz processors on here, but we will see 20x multiprocessors into systems here, and that brings on its own set of challenges. So I do think we've got at least another 3 orders of magnitude of power coming, and it's hard to say what will make games look like on there. There may be brand new technologies like certain video analysis things that become really critical core technologies. I mean, I do think that the things that will make the most difference are breakthroughs in the I/O experience, where we're still kind of using a gamepad of some kind and a screen for output on there. And it may yet be time for head-mounted displays to catch on, where the last couple of hurrahs that they went through on there really failed because the time wasn't right yet. But we have the power to drive those effectively now, although there are still issues with the sensing of position that are not worked out there. But things like that will make much more of a difference than just saying 1,000 times more power through the same gamepad and out the same TV. And it's always hard to predict a discontinuity when something will come out and change, but it's hard to even predict the slope when we're looking at things, even these common changes, when it's so steep. It's one thing to be in a stable industry where you can say, okay, over the next decade we will have 20% cheaper aluminum and this will affect our production lines in this way, but to say we're going to have 1,000 times more power, I mean, I've been through it a couple times now, and I would not feel any confidence in my ability to say what that's going to mean for the industry.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.